So welcome to our next class on Make Peace, a strategic guide for achieving lasting peace in Israel. We've covered a lot of topics. We've talked a lot about how underlying all of this is our claim to the Holy Land of Israel, and that's the soul of the conflicts, right? But there's another area that the Lubavitch Rebbe talked about, which is critical to success, and that's what we're going to cover tonight. And that's the ideological war, and that in the same tense, the Torah is our greatest weapon. It's the Torah that gave us the concept that land is ours, that God gave that to us. But there's something deeper here we're going to dive into tonight. And the quote at the beginning of chapter 9, the beginning of the quote says that, and all the nations of the world shall see that God's name is called upon you, and they will fear you. That's Deuteronomy 28, verse 10. It's a reference to the tefillin, that when we put on tefillin, that the nations of the world shall see that God's name is called upon you, and they will fear you. The ideology of this is that, again, it comes back to us being solid. Solid in our pride, solid in our education, solid in our understanding of who we are and what we are and where we belong, right? And that's what we're going to come to. And we're going to put that, post that against the kind of an understanding of what's going on in the world in that area. So while military strategy is essential, success in modern warfare extends beyond the physical engagement. It ultimately lies in the unwavering dedication to our cause and the readiness to make sacrifices for it. So the Torah's perspective on military strategy and the Jewish right to the land is logical, offers the best chance at peace and prosperity for Israel. But a key element to all of this is the strength of our ideological commitment. How committed are we to being Jews, and Jews that are committed to the Torah? That's the bottom line, right? So let's look at the other side. Israel's enemies at the beginning, at its founding, were all motivated by Arab nationalism. Right? So therefore, because Arabs have to have a nation, this is going to be part of the nation, so it's Arab nationalism, right? But by 1950, things were starting to shift. And a young group of passionate Muslim clerics began to fervently study traditional Islam, fusing that with their political ideology, even adopting Marxist narratives about class struggle and connecting and merging that with Islamic stories, narratives, right? So Islam became the narrative of the oppressed, while secular regimes with Muslim polity, the most of certainly Israel, United States, they become the oppressor. So Islam is the oppressed, and United States and Israel are the oppressors, and so they're taking that narrative with the theology of Islam. So in 1979, this brand of fierce Islamist purism burst into the public sphere with the Iranian Revolution. Overnight, the imperial state of Iran became the Islamic Republic of Iran. And at its inception in 1979, the new republic made use of violent gangs who called themselves Hezbollah. Hezbollah has the original Arabic Hizba Allah, meaning the party of God. Again, becoming more and more fanatically religious, right? And so what's interesting is Sunni and Shiite strains of Islam have given birth to a number of terrorist organizations. Hamas is associated with Sunni, and the Hezbollah is associated with the Shiite. And Iran used the Hezbollah in Lebanon as a key player in their axis of resistance Their axis of resistance included branches of Hezbollah and many other countries, all of whom follow the Shiite interpretation of Islam. However, Iran also welcomed the Sunni groups, such as Hamas, into this axis of resistance. It all goes back to the idea of those who hate my enemy are my friends. Mm-hmm. Right? So groups which would make up the axis of resistance are not just terrorist groups. Instead, they are an entire ideologies which strive to create an Islamic state, a nationalist Islamic state. So they're mixing these ideas, right? Since the inception of the Islamic Republic of Iran, its terrorist groups have been the menace to the West, with Hezbollah perpetrating one of the deadliest attacks on the United States Marine Corps, as you remember, back in 1983.
Right.
Nonetheless, few people fully anticipated the depth of the danger that this radical Islam posed to the world, and even fewer consider strategies for how to fight it.
But still.
So let's look at the Jewish strategy on how to fight that. So we're looking at Islam. It spread across the fanatical Islam, and the teaching of that to the youth. So now you've got serious problem. Hold that thought. I'm going to tell a completely different story. Semi-related. You'll get that with the connection when I get to the end of it, right? But years ago, when I was on college campus for the first time as a freshman, 1978, and San Diego State University, right? And I immediately joined the Jewish Student Union there because I wanted to have something Jewish to participate in. And I was walking across the main area of the campus where all the tables are. You know, everybody's selling their wares and their clubs and stuff like that. And I was walking with the president of the Jewish Student Union, and I saw this guy with a beard and a yarmulke, and he was putting black boxes on people. Mm. And I turned to her and I said, like, what is that? And she said, that's Chabad. They're fanatics. Keep your distance.
Heard that.
So the next day or two later, I'm walking across camp with somebody else, and we pass the same spot because that's the main drag where everyone goes through. And that person asked me, hey, what's that? And I said, that's Chabad, they're fanatics, keep your distance. And as the words came out of my mouth, my head said, stop. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're just parroting somebody else's answer. You don't even know what you're talking about. Hey, they invited you for a Friday night dinner and service. Go check it out and find out. So that Friday, I went to service. And I came back Shabbos morning. Anyway, you guys know the rest of the story. But when I tell the story, yeah, no, it's Chabad. We're fanatics. Absolutely, we're fanatics, right? And that's how it relates back to this story, because if you're fanatically religious, you're willing to do anything, whatever it takes, in your service of God, including move your family out to North Dakota, right? Or some other crazy things. So fanaticism, it's a real thing, but what's the faith that fanaticism is pushing? Right? So that's the question. So let's dive in over here, right? So in the turn of the 20th century, Tsarist Russia entered its sunset years, and the diverse ideologies sent the world into an upheaval. Competing political and intellectual movements swirled, upending the world order. Marxism, socialism, anarchism, nationalism, progressivism, all the isms, right? Mm. And against that turbulent backdrop, in 1897, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Reb Sholem Dov Ber Schneerson, who was known also by the acronym for his name, the Rashab, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, so Rashab. He started a brand new yeshiva, a brand new Jewish education called Tomchei Tamimim Lubavitch. And the students of Yeshiva Tomchei Tamimim would be called Tamim. And Tamim means the pure ones, right? So they would create a new yeshiva where the ideology was to passionately push Jewish fervor, passion for Judaism, a passion for serving God. Because up until that time, you had Judaism at that point had become a very intellectual process. Yeah. So you were either a great scholar or you were a nobody we don't even say hello to on the street. Right? And so there was this vast separation between the scholarly and the masses. And this came after a lot of other struggles. The Baal Shem Tov came on the scene after the pogroms and the false messiahs. Judaism was at an all-time low when the Baal Shem Tov came on the scene. Now you fast forward 7 generations, and what's going on in the world is a bunch of isms, and things are shifting and changing. You don't have monarchies like they used to. All kinds of things are changing here. And so in Lubavitch, they started Yeshiva Tomchei Tamimim, and the unique thing was that in Yeshiva Tomchei Tamimim, part of the daily study would be Chassidus. That not just in your spare time or on Shabbos, you would learn some Chassidus, but no, Chassidus would be part of the daily regiment of studies, along with Chumash and Mishnah and Gemara and Navi, all of these things, but we're adding Chassidus to the schedule. And that was new. And Chassidus, if you remember, before Chassidim were called Chassidim, they were called the Freiliche, the happy ones. The happy ones. Why were they called the happy ones? Because Chassidus teaches you that everything is in the hands of God. Everything comes from God. God loves you. He only wants what's good for you. And so everything is good. Everything is great. And if it doesn't feel great, dig deeper, because God only wants to give you good. And if you don't understand it, why did you think you would understand God? So we've had classes on that. We've had classes on the Chassidic approach to joy. We've had on bitochen, on trust in God. So Chassidim had been called the Freilich, or the happy ones. Now they'd be called Chassidim, the pious ones, because if you truly believe, then you can be truly happy. And so this became part of the daily study in the yeshiva of Tomchei Tamimim. And essentially, this ideology would become a vanguard to teaching passionate Judaism, a passionate relationship with God. And they would revitalize and protect the Jewish people from the dangers of the ideological storm winds that were growing. If you fast forward to look today, Chabad is all over the world.
Yeah.
I remember back in the 80s, there was a saying of Chabad is everywhere that Coca-Cola is, but we're also in Russia. And then Russia got Coke, so can't say that anymore. And so the idea would be that the students of Tomchei Tamimim, who are called Tamimim, would be this vanguard. And the Rebbe Rashab referred to the students of the yeshiva as Chayalei Beis David, the warriors of the house of David, making a reference back to the time when King David fought the wars to defeat all the enemies of the Jewish people and create a time of peace, which his son Solomon took over. But that Chayalei Beis David is the soldiers of King David, right? The house of David. And they would be, that was the nickname for these yeshiva students. Now, they're not fighting a physical war. They're fighting an ideological war, a spiritual war. And the yeshiva students could no longer suffice with concerning just for our own spiritual welfare, but they are mandated in those turbulent times that the yeshiva students needed to become ideological warriors, bearing the banner of passionate Torah allegiant Judaism, to inspire the entire Jewish people. They needed to teach Jews to be proud and embrace their Judaism and not all the other isms that are going on in the world at the time. So this was a beginning of a change. And you see that the change didn't come easy. The scholarly divisions of the Jewish world were like, calm down, Hasidim, just, maintain your place. Don't. But you have to. We're going to come back to the idea later. But you have to fight fire with fire, right? So if people are getting passionate about all their isms, Judaism has to defend against that. So we have to do some crazy things. Like, it's not normal to go out in the streets and ask people, "Are you Jewish?" Will you put on tefillin? That's not normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the world has gotten so crazy that we have to counter that craziness with some craziness towards the side of holiness. There's craziness to the sides of stupidity. We have to be the craziness to the sides of holy. And so that's why, we do all these crazy things, because we're fanatics. So the Rebbe Rashab formed an elite force of young men who would go on to spread the Torah's teachings. His son and successor, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, we call the Frierdiker Rebbe, but his nickname was Rayatz, from Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, right? He continued to support this concept, this developing army, but he created a separate division for young women called Achash Tamimim, purity of women, right? And so as he's maintaining what his father created, he created something that had never been done before: women's yeshivas, girls' yeshivas, getting girls to start learning the depth of Torah, including even studying Mishnah and Gemara. This was a brand new thing that had not been done in the Torah world before. And again, because the times have changed and we need passionate warriors. In 1941, our Rebbe, the Rebbe of our generation, the seventh generation, took charge of at that time, he wasn't the Rebbe at that time, but he took charge of a newly founded group called Merkez Le'Inyanei Chinuch. So 1941, the Educational Outreach Institute was created, primarily starting with a publishing house to get materials out to people, but also creating and instituting things like, in New York, there was called a release time, where kids in public schools could get released from class to go to religious training. And it would be like a 45-minute thing. And so Chabad stepped in, took advantage of that opportunity, and created a release time for Jewish kids. And rabbinical students would go to do that on a regular basis to provide that Jewish education. But again, we're stepping out of the norm of what things used to be. Usually, you get your Jewish education at home or at your synagogue and your study hall. Now we're going out. We're going out because the times require it. Moving further on, 1951, the Rebbe took leadership of the Chabad movement, and he was maintaining and advancing the Chayalei Beis David Bachram, the students at Yeshiva Tamchei Tamimim, and the Achash Tamimim girls colleges, girls schools. And he then branched out another section called Tzivos Hashem, the army of God. And he's using the term that was popularized in Chumash itself, right? And he would start using the idea of Tzivos Hashem relating to the children under bar and bas mitzvah. So we've got a boys' school, we've got a girls' school, and now we're talking about kids under bar and bas mitzvah, Tzivos Hashem, the armies of God, and talking about them regularly, and talking about, in Tehillim, it talks about King David talked about the voices of the children, because they're free from sin. They're not obligated yet. They're not responsible yet. So they have this purity that when they learn and study Torah, it's all good. It's all mitzvahs. It's all an elite force, because they're not having the same challenges that once you get older, you have all kinds of other challenges. And the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is got its own ideas, right? So the children under bar and bas mitzvah, they're holy and pure, and when they say they do Torah and mitzvahs, it's like the icing on the cake because they're not even obligated to do so. It's part of their education. But when they're wearing tzitzis or they're doing their prayers, it's not because they're obligated to. They're kids, but when they do it, wow, does that disrupt the heavens? Because it's better than good, right? It's an amazing thing. And so the Rebbe would talk about that, and then the Rebbe did something fascinating. In 1972, the Rebbe created a children's rally where the children all came to the synagogue with their teachers. They came during school hours, and they came with the teachers, and they filled up the synagogue from all the different schools in the area. They came, and this was 1972, in the months preceding the Yom Kippur War. As one could say that maybe there's a premonition. Right. The Rebbe called upon the children and their prayers and their mitzvahs to vanquish enemies and avengers. And in 1975, the Rebbe introduced the 12 Pesukim. He chose 12 passages from Chumash, Mishnah, Gemara, from the different sources of Torah. He chose 12 passages, and he said the soldiers of Tzivos Hashem, the boys and girls under Bar and Bas Mitzvah, should memorize these Pesukim and say them out loud.
Wow.
1980, the Rebbe called for the children's prayer rallies on special occasions, like before Rosh Hashanah, during the Aseret Shemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of repentance, during the festival of Sukkot. And these were especially, these rallies were held at the Kaisel, the Western Wall, at Maras HaMachpelah, the cave of our patriarchs, and at Cave of Rachel, the tomb, Rachel's tomb in Beis Lechem. And so call upon these rallies where the pure children would be able to say all these verses and learn some more Torah. And there'd be some treats and some other things because it is still children, right? Where do we see this? Where do we learn this? Mordechai HaTzadik, in the story of Purim, when the death was facing the entire Jewish people, Mordechai HaTzadik, he gathered children. I think 10,000 was the number. He gathered the children, and they made this massive rally, and he studied with them. And again, this was the beginning that changed over the whole Purim story, is gathering the children, the pure children, and the verses of children saying and doing mitzvahs. So this was the beginning of this, right? And I want to say, I remember back then when all this was happening, and there was a lot of confusion of the Rebbe announced we're going to do this thing called Tzivos Hashem. We're going to have children. We have the rallies. Now we're going to actually make it an official Tzivos Hashem, and we're going to have medallions and ranks and, copy the military program to some degree. And we weren't sure what that means. How do you actually do that? So there was that, the chaos of trying to create what the Rebbe is talking about. The Rebbe's got the vision, but someone has to actually make it happen, right? And today, what I see today, it's amazing. My grandkids, they have a list of missions. Their daily missions, which include certain hygiene things, like brushing your teeth and taking a bath and things like that. They get points for doing that. Then there's the daily prayers and laying blessings on foods and washing Negelwasser and all the daily Jewish things. And then there's also the helping at home things, clearing the table and setting the table and things like that. And they've got this whole chart of these are your missions. And you can check them off. And as you check them off, then there are the special missions that come for the holidays. Did you say the blessing of the lulav and Esther? Did you hear the shofar? Did you go out to help other Jews hear the shofar? Right? And then they get extra points for all those things, and all those points add up, and you change rank. And every time you change rank, you actually get a challenge coin. and it has the different ranks, and you get to wear different insignias, whatever, and hats. I'm gonna bear it a second. They have a special logo. Can you see it?
Eight.
Is that clear or no?
Yeah.
Yep. They have a special logo, special yarmulkes. It's the logo has the tzaddik and the hay for Tzivos Hashem, and they've got caps with Tzivos Hashem. They've got some uniform things, but basically, they're engaging the kids into an army of God. In 1980, there was an Israeli journalist, Moti Eden, and Moti had a little interview with the Rebbe, very short, and he asked the Rebbe, why was the Rebbe pushing all of these children's rallies, noting that these gatherings where the children would recite Torah verses and prayers, somehow they often preceded major events critical to Israel's security. For example, the Rebbe is repeatedly calling for such rallies in the months that were leading up to the Yom Kippur War. And the Rebbe explained Israel's precarious security situation necessitates these rallies. The Rebbe's focus was not on the military concerns here, because the military will take care of that, but rather on the ideological shifts unfolding in the Middle East. He observed a growing trend among Middle Eastern nations towards heightened religious devotion, and that increase in religious fundamentalism had given rise to more relentless adversary. So the rallies were a crucial measure to counteract the escalating ideological threat. The Rebbe said, Arab generations exhibit a level of fanaticism and zeal for their religion and independence that surpasses any form of religious leadership seen in previous generations. As they get more zealous and get more fanatic, right? The only way to combat that is to have that same level or more passion ourselves. What the Rebbe is basically saying is that, yes, we have to fight the military fight, but if your heart's not in it, if your commitment's not in it, if your devotion's not in it, well, then we all know that you can't win. It doesn't matter how strong your weapons are. If you're not into it, if you're not committed, you can't win. And in stark contrast to the Islamic world's surging ideological zeal, the Rebbe mentions, unfortunately, our Jewish youth are headed in the opposite direction. The Rebbe said this in the 80s, and he said 30 years ago, which of course would have been in the 50s, the fact that Israel was a pioneering country was highly valued. No one needed to be convinced to become a pioneer. People actually came on their own and demanded that they be given the opportunity to become a pioneer in this desert. They would request land in the Negev, eager to contribute to the pioneering project through their own labor and sacrifice. I remember when we were moving to Australia, one of my mother's comments about the interior of Australia is this huge, vast, uninhabitable desert. And my mom's comment was, it would take Zionists to make something grow there. But that's it. The passion for pioneering is what brought people to Israel and endured incredible hardships because they were absolutely zealous for this land, a Jewish land, whether it was a Jewish nationalism or whether it was a passion for the God-given holy land. But whatever it was, the zeal to establish the land was very strong. And the Rebbe says now, which of course what he was saying in 1980, they say, enough, we've lived under pressure for over 30 years. We deserve a fun and peaceful life. So they're losing the zeal. They don't have that chayas. Chayas means passion, but it comes from the word chay, which means life, a life of passion. They don't have that. So The problem with this weakness, this lack of passion, is that it's witnessed by all the nations surrounding Israel, as well as by London and Washington and Paris and Russia. The hostile nations had succeeded in the exploitation of Israel at that point, because the government in Washington is also not so strong, because they're also affected with the idea of pursuit of pleasure, right? They also want to take the easy way out and have a nice peaceful sleep, right? So that's not going to change anything. Today's Israeli is not interested in pioneering. He's tired and he wants a few years off. So the Rebbe held this idea that the antidote to the growing problem lies in immersing Jews, especially Jewish children, in Torah, especially the teaching of God's giving the Holy Land to the Jewish people. So the critical part that needs to change is the perspective of Jewish youth regarding their personal connection with the Holy Land. Not only the Jews in Israel, who tend to graduate, finish their army service, and then they leave, right? Or even the Jewish youth in America.
Mhm.
I'm not Israeli. It's another country, so what do I care, right? No, but that is your land, right? We have to establish that is your land, that is your birthright. And as much as you're American, that is still your home.
How do you feel about the Hasidim in Israel? Who there's a lot of them, and they're more religious than Lubavitch, but they won't serve in the military.
Jeffrey, I want you to listen to last week's class. It's recorded and posted. Because that was the class. The class was the Jews who want to give away the land. The Jews who feel we can't own this land, we can't believe in this land, right?
So I didn't get that memo. Okay.
The ones that don't serve in the army, that don't want to pay taxes, right? That's exactly what we talked about last week. And the Rebbe takes each of their ideas and shreds it. They're claiming these are your Torah ideas, and the Rebbe takes each of those Torah ideas and say, here's where you're categorically misdirected.
Here's my question, Rabbi. Here's my question. When did it become our right to give away the land that was given to us by Hashem?
Right.
What authority do we have to do that? That was promised to us, and we shouldn't be giving it to anybody else.
And as we covered in last week's class, anyone who does that is stealing from Jews.
Okay.
They have no right to do that. And by the way, one thing we talked about last week was, and imagine God's kaviyachol, so to speak, God's thoughts when we give away that which He gave to us.
Yeah.
Talk about ingratitude. You know, God gives you these presents, this amazing land filled with fruit, milk and honey, and you're giving it away. That's not a level of gratitude. That's, so yeah, absolutely. But how do you counter that? The only way to counter that kind of thought process is to teach Torah and mitzvahs, become passionate about Torah mitzvahs, so that people are willing to die for their cause, willing to do whatever it takes to keep what God has given us and to defend it. But in doing so, you have to teach that when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, it's not just the Jews that stood on Mount Sinai. It's every generation of Jews since then and going forward from here. That same one God is mine, and it's personal. And that same God gave me this land as an inheritance. And as we create that passion, then we'll be able to stand up to anything. And by the way, when we have that passion, God backs us up. one of the interesting things about, again, the story of Purim, right, is that the Jews attended Kadosh's party to celebrate his kingship, where he used from the Beis Hamikdash that he had conquered and taken, and he used those to serve things at his party. Think about the ingratitude of the Jews that went to the party. And God's like, and you're celebrating with my utensils at his kingship? And so God, Hester Esther Ponai, I will surely hide my face. When you turn away from me, I will surely hide my face.
Wow.
And so when we turned away, so that then he hid, and Achashverosh and Haman, all this came up. When we turn back around, then we say that care, and we start doing more Torah, we start doing more passion for Torah mitzvahs. So what's going to be the consequence? God steps back into the picture, and B'layla hahu, on that very night, everything changed. Everything changes. So it's our zeal, it's our passion for Torah and mitzvahs, and our passion for the God-given land that gives us the energy to win the battle, to be completely invested to win the battle.
I have a quick question. I was sick last week, so I missed. But
So I'm going to refer you back to the recording. It's posted, honey.
I know, me and Jeff. But people who are completely stubborn, so no matter how much you try to get them reconnected and have a passion, they're like brick walls. My question is, people who are like that, who refuse to turn over and are negative to us, are we allowed to disavow them?
No.
Okay.
So I'm going to quote in Jewish law, you have a situation, for example, where there's a husband who doesn't want to grant a divorce. And a divorce has to be granted willingly. And he doesn't want to. The court of Jewish law is empowered to go talk with him.
Blanket party?
And yeah, blanket party. Yes. And talk with him until he decides that he actually does want to give his wife a divorce, and as soon as possible. And then you ask the question, well, wait a minute. If he did so under duress, how is that called voluntarily giving his wife a divorce because he chooses to do so? That's coercion, right? And the Jewish law answer is he wants to. It's his ego, it's his pride, it's his emotional status that's creating the conflict. Take that out of the picture and the real guy is there, because every person, every Jew has a godly, kind soul and wants to do the right thing. And sometimes he needs just to be helped to get over himself because he does want to do the right thing. In the same vein, we know that which comes from the heart is received by the heart. If I want to connect with someone, I'm only going to be able to connect with someone if I truly care. Because if I truly care, they'll hear me. What I say from the heart will be received by their heart, and it will be accepted. But that takes time, takes commitment, and takes truly caring. So again, when we have someone who has mistaken ideas, our job is to reach out with love and care and become close with them, and over time help them see what the Torah has to offer and the truth behind the Torah. And sometimes it will take time. I remember one time when there was a Chabad house that was going to honor a senator who had done nothing for Israel, had done nothing for the Jewish people, but they were going to honor him. And so someone wrote to the Rebbe and complained and said, why are you honoring this guy? Why is your Chabad house honoring him? You didn't do anything. talk about jump of command, right? They didn't actually talk to the Chabad rabbi. They went straight to the boss. They went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and they said, how is it your Chabad house is honoring this guy who never did anything for the Jewish people? And the Rebbe's response was, we don't always honor people for what they've done, or what they could do. And by the way, within the next couple of years, he made a couple of very influential votes that helped support Israel.
Wow.
So again, it starts out with caring, truly caring, and caring from the right place. You know.
So we need somebody. So we need somebody to help Bernie Sanders understand.
We don't mention people specifically here in this class, especially not while we're recording.
Yeah.
Come on, you know that.
I apologize. Okay, some
Our job-
influential senator.
Everybody, all of them, we need to be able to share and care and help them to understand all the benefits of Torah mitzvah. And we have to teach this to the children, to be proud and connected to the land, to claim it as their divine inheritance, so they'd be ready to fight for it. I remember in California, late 80s, I received a grant from Outward Bound to do a program with Outward Bound to take our kids, because we're a minority. The whole program was basically bringing minorities into Outward Bound. And so there was a Black youth group, there was a Hispanic youth group, there was our youth group. We had a couple, like 5 or 6 different youth groups for minorities that were part of this program for the year. And there was a Sunday set aside when all of the youth directors came together, and all of the Outward Bound instructors, who were young college white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kids, and they were going to be learning things about the minority groups that they would be working with. And so there were guest speakers that came in that spoke to the group, the instructors as well as us, about each group and things you need to know. You're going to do a wilderness adventure with some of these kids, and on your shopping list that they have to bring with them to the trip is a bandana, which you use on camping trips all the time, right? But if you're telling that to inner city ghetto, you just separated them by the colors of the bandanas they bring. You already brought the gangs into it. You will lose right off, right? The guy who was speaking about the Spanish, LA Spanish population, you're giving a list of things they have to bring. I have kids that don't even go to school because they don't have shoes. So if you're not providing all those things, my kids aren't even coming, right? What was fascinating to me was they brought someone in from the Jewish Federation to talk about the Jewish kids and their experience with Outward Bound. What would that look like? And he said something fascinating. He said, if you want to have a conversation with American kids about conflict resolution, and you want to use the example of Protestants and Catholics in Belfast, we can have that conversation because we're Americans and we're not there. So there's this distance you can have to have that conversation. He said, when you're talking to the Jewish kids, even if they've never been to Israel, it's personal. It is their home. It is personal. So it was very fascinating for me to hear someone who was totally a secular Jew be able to explain to this group Israel and Jerusalem is personal. Even American Jews who don't have that connection of having been there and seen there and all those things, right? So it's personal. I was fascinated, but that's true, right? But we need to cultivate that, because if they don't see it, if they don't know it, then how can they be expected to fight for it, to stand up for it, right? So the Rebbe has talked about God will grant his people, again, a quote, a pasuk, God will grant his people strength and bless them with peace. And he emphasized that strength precedes peace, meaning to achieve peace requires a projection of power. Now, all you military folks, you know that term real well. The projection of power, right? If you project that power, you can save lives and you can prevent wars because no one's going to start up with you. But you have to be able to come in as a pasuk. The pasuk says that his people, God will grant his people strength and bless them with peace. But the strength has to come first. And that strength has to come from an understanding of Torah and mitzvahs and the value of Torah and mitzvahs, which creates the passion, which creates the commitment. We have to fight fire with fire. And so by the kids shouting out pasukim, verses of Chumash and Mishnah and Gemara, when they shout out these pasukim, that instills a conviction in the children. And the faith of the children then can counter the radical faith of Islam. Now, that's one piece. So we have to be as educated and passionate, if not more educated and passionate, about our faith and our traditions than those in Islam. Otherwise, we can't win a power struggle, no matter what kind of weapons you have, if you don't have the passion, right? The commitment. On that note, the Rebbe also mentions that Israel has a responsibility to oversee the Arab education within its borders, like Judea, Samaria, Gaza. They're in Israel proper, those areas. Israel has to oversee that education. And he expressed a lot of concern that the Israeli government's hands-off approach allowed for a formidable enemy within Israel itself. The Rebbe said, I'm quoting here, the Arabs who live within the state are allowed to do whatever they want. They can say anything they wish. They can print whatever they want in the newspapers. They can educate their children as they see fit. And consequently, a new generation of Arabs is emerging. The youth are growing up with an education that glorifies self-sacrifice for their values and death of Jews.
You're talking about in Samaria and Gaza?
Yep.
Yeah.
That education system, right? But that's how you create suicide warriors, right? So Israel should be responsible to require all the Islamic schools to register. Actually, this is not the Rebbe's words. This was one of the commentaries. The political philosopher was saying that Israel should require all the Islamic schools to register and all the Islamic teachers and scholars to be licensed by the state and prohibit them from promoting any violence. Just prohibit teaching violence. And then, of course, pay them for their good work, right? So, yes, we have to be passionate. We have to teach passion about Judaism, Torah, mitzvahs, and we also have to be responsible to not let those in our country teach violence. I remember that around the same time when the Chicago Nazis wanted to march on Skokie and had a really difficult time preventing it, around that same time, there was a school teacher, there was a parent in Canada who was faced with a anti-Semitic history teacher in the public school who was teaching anti-Semitism, virulent anti-Semitism. And they were able to basically shut that down and take him out of the school because Canada has a law against teaching hatred.
Right.
And so, again, Israel should have that law. You can't teach hatred and you can't teach violence. Okay, new topic. We talked about the children, and we talked about Tzivos Hashem and teaching children. what about the morale of our soldiers? The morale of soldiers, children are going to grow up and they become the soldiers, but what about here and now? What about our soldiers, right? It was an interesting conversation that went on. There was an Israeli general who was visiting the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was talking about bringing Torah education into the troops as a way of engaging them and taking their mind off the fight to recuperate a little bit, right? And the general was saying, we bring entertainment in. We bring performers in. And the devil was saying that doesn't support the morale in the sense of actually build them up and strengthen their fortitude. That's just wasteless entertainment. Contemporary warfare has completely.
Never.
Pardon?
Don't you guys in Lubavitch like entertainment? Yes, you do.
We do enjoy entertainment. Purim
Yeah.
parties, bring-ins to talk about Torah and mitzvahs. Contemporary warfare has completely changed. In the past, military strength was determined quantitatively. The army with the most weapons and soldiers would win the battle. Today, the calculus has changed entirely, and wars are won by the army with the most sophisticated weaponry. They are won by sophisticated weaponry, but the type of weapon matters. But the soldiers employing the weapons, fighting the war, that matters even more. It comes down to our people. The soldier's inner psychological and spiritual state determines their ability to perform in war. The attitudes of the soldiers and the population determines their ability to be victorious. You can't win a war if you're down in the dumps. You can't win a war if you don't believe in the cause. And you can't win if the people back home don't support you. So this is true of any army, but how much more so when you're dealing with Jewish soldiers who are defending the land of Israel. The key to their victory is their perspective. If God is not watching the city, the watchman watches in vain. That's a quote. If God is not watching the city, the watchman watches in vain. We have to help God watch the city by connecting with God and knowing about our connection with God. We have to constantly be bolstering the faith and the relationship of the soldiers with God. Having faith in God at all times, our primary strength comes from the fact that we invoke the name of God. God's name is called upon us. Throughout Israel's history, many wars and battles seem to have been naturally been headed towards absolute disaster, and somehow we succeed, we overcome. But the army's morale has to be at the top. Today, people talk about morale in the sense of English terms, secular ideas, right? But Jewish terms of koyach and betochen and amuna, those are the ones that for the 2,000 years, 3,000 years have always been our strength, is understanding that aspect of it. Our faith in God, our trust in God, our relationship with God has always gotten us through. Now we'll use the word morale because that's what everyone's talking about, right? But if we have the right morale, if we have the right mindsets of our relationship with God, and God gave us the land and this is mine to defend, our enemies won't even consider attacking in the first place because they'll already know they can't win. As long as our koyach, our spirit, is healthy and have no doubts about our relationship with God, so obviously God's protecting the city, we don't have to worry. We don't even have to worry about our relationship with bigger powers that provide weaponry, because God can figure this out. So to boost morale, we require individuals who can provide soldiers with meaningful inspiration, leaving them motivated enough to be able to inspire others themselves as well. This was known, this was understood during the bulk of Jewish wars in Israel, you know that civilians can't go into the battle area, right? Civilians have to stay out, right? Except Chabad. The Chabadnikim, they come in with their mitzvah tank, and they come in and they create spirit, and they create joy, and they dance, and they sing religious songs, and they get everybody going, and they build up the spirit, and put on tefillin with everybody, and that gives everybody a koyach, a strength, and a commitment to be able to get back to the battle. Now, somewhere along the way, politics got what it does, and somebody said, no, you can't let Chabad come in. I equate that, and those people who create that environment, in my mind, that's like how in World War II, the Japanese order was to take out the medics and the chaplains first, because that will destroy the morale of the men, right? Which is why our medics were told not to wear a red cross, right? Because then you're just a target. Judaism is the oldest, most enduring tradition. There must be some secret to its continuity. We see that no secular ideology across the ages accounts for Jewish staying power, neither language nor clothing. The only thing that gives the Jewish people their resilience is Torah and mitzvahs. What is it that someone had said about Shabbos has kept the Jews more than the Jews have kept Shabbos? Who said that? Does anyone remember who said that?
No.
I think I want to say it was Ben Gurion, but don't quote me there. So these action-oriented mitzvahs, like putting on tefillin, lighting Shabbos candles, right? They're action-oriented mitzvahs. The mitzvah is the word mitzvah, it means command, right? But the root of the word is to connect. So every time we do this mitzvah, we're connecting with God. We're bridging that gap with us. And that connection then builds us stronger. So it's the action-oriented mitzvahs and the faith in God. These are the factors that have protected the Jewish people for thousands of years. People come up with new ideologies and new ways of doing things. But if you look back at Jewish history, doing mitzvahs has built up our connection with God. Our connection with God is what gives us the strength and the courage to fight the fight and to not give up and bend over. The Rebbe talked about, one might ask, what is the connection between putting on tefillin and morale? When it comes to medicine and weaponry, the relevant question isn't if it makes sense to the layman, but rather, does it work? Does it yield results? And when we look at the track record of action-oriented mitzvahs, we see that they are the only tool that guarantees Jewish continuity. They work, and we need to use them. In your spare time, you can theorize and talk about why they work. When we make our community and our army bases holy by following the Torah's ways, they receive the blessings of the Lord your God walks in your midst of your camp to save you and deliver you from your enemies. So the Jewish people's secret weapon is doing mitzvahs. And when we do so, then, quote, awe and terror will befall our enemies. Now, if we can get both the soldiers and the population to engage in Torah mitzvahs, then you won't have wars. With respect to physical weaponry, we are careful to test it out, before using it, even if it should theoretically work. So similarly, when it comes to spiritual or psychological weaponry, you cannot suffice with theories. You got to test it out. Test out your weapons. Put on tefillin, light Shabbos candles, see what it's doing for you. And when our enemies know that Jews are a fierce enemy who strikes back, they will be so terrified that they will not go to war to begin with. Putting on tefillin has the spiritual quality of striking that fear. There was another thing that Rebbe did to again, build up this unity and this strength within the Jewish people. Torah is what unites us. One of the commandments of the Torah is that every Jew should write their own Sefer Torah. Now, if you're not a scribe, which most of us are not, then you could hire someone to write it. Granted that writing a Sefer Torah is like $3,000 to $5,000 worth of, to have one written for you. That's expensive. But the Rebbe said, let's do it together. Because if people join in a mitzvah, then they're united even more. So the Rebbe encouraged that every single soldier should give $1 towards the writing of a Sefer Torah for the protection of the Chayale, the soldiers in the IDF. And so there's this unity, everyone's contributing, of a mitzvah, writing your own Sefer Torah, and that everyone is united within that Sefer Torah. And obviously the Torah is what unites us. The content of this is what unites us. And this will be another way, again, of building the connection and strengthening our people to have the fortitude to stand up against whatever comes. So, conclusion. We've demonstrated that strengthening our ideological resolve is the only way to emerge victorious in the war over the land of Israel. The key to bolstering Jewish ideological fortitude lies in the study of the Torah, which is what we're doing every night that we gather together, observing the mitzvahs with a particular emphasis on educating our children about their connection to the land of Israel through the verses of the Torah that talk about the fact that it is a God-given land to us. And furthermore, doing the mitzvahs increases the soldiers' morale. And ultimately, no matter how powerful our weaponry, our technology is, the only thing that guarantees our ability to overcome threats is through Tzivas Hashem and the commitment to Torah, of doing Torah and mitzvahs. At the end of the day, the real battle is the battle of the spirit.
Yeah.
Because if we are spiritually strong and committed, then we cannot be defeated, undefeatable. And God's on our side, and we cannot lose.
So